This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. My guest today is Robert Neal Marshall. Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Heather. It is an honor to be on your show, and congratulations. I've watched the early episodes, and it's fascinating the differences in personal interpretations of the experience, yet the commonality that seems to echo amongst all of them. And I'm honored to be here with you.
Thank you so much. And that is so true what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you're an actor, you're also a filmmaker, and you've had a near-death experience. And we're going to talk about all of it. But
Okay.
Let's start with your near-death experience. Can you fill us in?
Sure. Basically, it's almost 10 years now. I will be 63 in a couple more weeks, so depending on when people are watching this. But at the time, I was 53 years old. It was August 3rd of 2013. And I had gone out to dinner with friends and my other half. And I had some GI issues that would get in the way sometimes. And I knew I shouldn't eat rich or fattening things. And as I was walking out of the house, they have a big salad bowl that has Halloween candies. And I snuck a few chocolates and caramels and put them in my pocket and ate them in the car on the way home and pretended I didn't do it. So I woke up, as it happened a number of times in the past, in the middle of the night with pain radiating from my gut and into my chest. And I thought, oh, here we go. And I would have these 3-4 hour episodes of excruciating pain that would eventually lift. This felt a little different. So I got in the shower, which I normally did, because it would relieve the pain. And I thought I could maybe belch up some indigestion or something, but everything was clear. And I thought that something's wrong, and the pain was radiating more into my arms and so forth. So I dried off, put on a bathrobe, and I literally Googled heart attack symptoms. And on the list, it said, if any one of these symptoms are occurring, call 911 within 5 minutes. And I'm walking around now maybe 35, 45 minutes. And everything on the list was yes, yes, check, check, check. Except the last one, which was nausea. I'd never experienced nausea before. But all of the others were also the same things as my GI issues. So I'm like, you don't believe this could be a heart attack. And I'm 53. So the last symptom made me think, if I didn't know any better, maybe I am indeed having a heart attack. And I went to my other half and I was like, Craig, I think I may need to call 911. Out like a light. So I said, don't worry, I'll call 911 myself. So I went downstairs again, just thinking this was bad indigestion, but just in case, let's call somebody. And a voice in my head said, hit the button now. And I listened to the voice. I hit the button. And within 6 minutes, they were there. They stayed on the phone with me. They said, you have a dog? I said, yes, we have a dog. So Craig was now up and pulling on his shorts, and they were at the front door. And he said, I'll get it. I said, no, I'll get the door. Just put the dog away. And then I answered the door. And they look at me and they go, are you the one? I said, yeah, it's me. And I think it's just indigestion. But they said, well, can you walk to the ambulance? I could see the ambulance in our parking lot. We live in a little townhouse complex. And I said, yeah, sure. I've been walking around for 45, 50 minutes. Why not? Walk into the ambulance, climb up into the stairs, and the pain is, really radiating, but I've been there before. And it's blue lights and kind of cool and spaceship-like in the ambulance. And they lay me in the chair. And I was big about, I hated doctors' needles. It's part of the problem. I didn't go get the checkups. I didn't do the follow-ups. So I'm laying in the chair. They start asking me some questions like how old are you, or what's your weight? And I'm like, wait. Don't tell me. I know the answer to this. And it was weird that I couldn't think of the answers. So then they start asking me my symptoms, and I start describing the pain. I said, well, it's actually radiating into my underarms like that. And this one guy named Smiley was his name. I learned afterwards. He had this big handlebar mustache. And this other guy, Ricardo, he says to Ricardo, put the 12 lead on him, meaning extra EKG leads. They stick the stickers on you and they do the readings. And they said, can we open your chest to get to you? I'm like, yeah, whatever you need to do. The next thing I know, Heather, I am like floating through outer space. I am feeling chilled. It is beautiful. It's almost like a hallway with like, and people talk about the light. There wasn't like a beam or a pin. It was just a brightness, and I was just floating towards it. It felt wonderful. At this point, I had no concept, no recollection, awareness at all that I'd been in pain, that I was in an ambulance, that I had gone through all this. It was, and I've said this many times, it was like changing the channel on a remote control. I'm there in one moment, the next moment, this is my new reality, and no connection to what came before it. I was just, this was it. And as I start floating, it's sort of a purple darkness that is encompassing me. And I've heard other people talk about it, sort of womb-like, if you will. And as I'm floating up, I see these amazing multicolored sort of images. And I watched Dave Bennett's talk, and he talked about crystal light partitions. For me, these were these images that were like multi-bright, intense colors, but it was like light and smoke mixed together, and they had like tendrils almost. And there's an artist that does fractal artwork, and it was the closest I've come to finding something that looks like what these quote entities were. And there was one in the front and several behind, and I'm drifting up to them and they're drifting to me. And the one in the front is getting closer and closer. And as I was filled with emotion, but at the same time, this was so familiar to me, and it was like familiar and comfortable. And the one in front, there's like this smoke that's coming out and starts to wrap around my neck like this and starts to pour into me. The second it does, I know it's my maternal grandmother. Doesn't look like my grandmother in any way, shape, or form, but I knew it was and her birthday was the day before mine. We were very, very close growing up, and she died many years before. Now, as she did, I was filled with such love and recognition that the emotion was overwhelming. And I flashed back at that moment to a point in time in real life many years before, where I went to visit her grave, which is out near LaGuardia Airport. I think it's Mount Hebron Cemetery is where the family is buried. And there are these low gravestones with slopes on them. And I was on a business trip. I had a rental car. I went out there, and I'm just laying against the gravestone, missing her. And I felt her presence like fill me, and the emotion. And I was like, oh my God, I can feel you. I can feel you. And I was sobbing. And I said to this entity, and we weren't talking, there weren't any words. It was just a connection. This is the same feeling I had that time when I visited you. And she said, or the voice said, the reason I showed you that then is so that you would recognize this feeling now and know that this is real. And I was just like, wow. I mean, the emotion was overwhelming. There were these other entities. I don't remember specific interaction with them, but in hindsight, I believe I know who some of them were. And to sort of add to this, I know some people are very definitive when they describe this is the way it is, and this is what you'll see, and this is how it is. I can't be so definitive. I can say this was my experience, this was my interpretation, my feeling. But I said to a cardiac nurse not long after this happened, I think I had to go through a stress test, and she said, well, did you see the light? And everyone would say, did you see the light? That's the first question. I'm like, yeah, I saw the light. And I said, there are things I remember very distinctly, and there are others I don't. And as a cardiac nurse, she said, there are a lot of patients who say that when you're ready, you will remember. So I found that sort of fascinating, that was what she said to me. So I don't remember interactions with these other entities, but I believe maybe there was.
And do you know who they were? I mean,
yes.
were they humans, or were they that had died, or were they?
Yes, they were living people that had died, friends of mine and family members that I felt were there to greet me. That's an assumption. I cannot say definitively. I mean, I never had any identification. The only one that was crystal clear was my grandmother, that entity that melted with me, filled me with this light, this energy. But at that point, what I do remember is that everything switched very quickly, and all of a sudden, and it was almost funny. I'm back at our house in Englewood, New Jersey, where we grew up. And we were lucky that in the house that we had at the time had a swimming pool, and there was this blue plastic boat that would float in the swimming pool. In the wintertime, we used it as a sled, and there was a big hill that went down the backyard. And I am suddenly in this plastic boat with my younger brother in front of me. I was maybe 15, 14, something like that. And we're going down the hill and I'm reliving. I mean, it was like I was there again. I could feel the cold on my face and the wool cap and the snow and the ice and the exhilaration of it. As we're heading down to the bottom of the hill, there's a link fence, a chain link fence at the bottom. And we're about to plow right into the fence. And I was like, oh, good. My brother's in front of me. He's going to hit the fence and cushion the blow before I. And that really happened. But this time I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to tell my brother, I am so sorry for putting my well-being in front of his. Like I wanted to apologize to him. And I don't know if that was just to warm me up for what was next or what, but that was one life review, relived moment. Then it switched and it became really sort of heavy. I was in our apartment that we lived prior to that. I grew up in Manhattan, New York City. We had an apartment in the Century, 62nd Street in Central Park West on the 7th floor. It was a corner apartment. And I had a very tough upbringing. And I have a very successful and famous stepfather in the industry, but there was a lot of emotional and abuse that went on. And at this time, I was a lot younger, 6 or 7, and I was going to jump out of the window. I was going to take my life. And I climbed up and I walked into the den. First of all, I could see the wallpaper. There was this woven sort of pattern wallpaper, and we had a cat that used to climb up it. And there was this marble wood table that was on one end. And in the corner, there was a bar that had all the liquor bottles. And I could see literally sort of a bent ice fork that was hanging. Everything was in such detail. Nighttime, looking out at Central Park. And you could climb up on a radiator. And then you could pull a handle and push the window out like that. I climbed up on the radiator and I opened the window and I looked down and I wanted to climb out. And I remember thinking to myself, and I relived this, I'm going to get in big trouble if I do this. Not like you'll kill yourself, just like, I'm going to get in trouble if I do this. And instead of jumping out, and I don't remember this aspect of when this really happened in real life, this time there's a voice. I didn't see an entity. I didn't see a person. It was just a voice talking to me that said, if you're not on this planet, there are people who won't be born. There are people who won't have careers. There are lives that will be changed. And I was shown that we are all, every single one, it wasn't special to me. We are like pebbles in a pond with these ripples. And everything we say, everything we do, every interaction affects others. And I was basically shown that, as a director, as someone who worked in casting and in my business, I've introduced actors to one another and they've fallen in love and then they've ended up having children. And there are people who literally are on this planet because I interfered. Other friends of mine who came and moved to Baltimore because they came to see me in a play and then met somebody and then married and had a child and opportunities, career, all of these crazy things. And it was basically showing me, you can't do this, Bob. But they showed me in reference to a time back then, but it was like, you've got to be back. You can't go yet. And the next thing I know, I'm sort of in this golden light. I felt like, I don't know if you or any of your viewers have had nitrous oxide at the dentist's office, the laughing gas, once. Well, it's a very pleasurable experience. So when you have to have a root canal, it's like, okay, give me the Novocaine, give me the gas, I'm happy. But there was a particular zone where it's like X's or golden light that I felt. And I suddenly felt like someone had given me the entire tank of nitrous. And I just said to myself, why do I feel like I'm at the dentist? And this voice from somewhere said, well, we had to shock you. And I'm like, who said that? Why would you shock me? And the voice said, just relax. We're getting you to the hospital. And then I was like, yeah, wait, I wasn't feeling too good. Yeah, wait a second. I said, shock you? There's like only one reason they shock you. And I'm like, whatever, you know? And then from there, it was like bits and pieces, what I call my alien abduction. I was now in this operating room that looked like a broom closet, like a janitor's closet with bookshelves and things. And Craig was standing right over me, and he was talking to me, and I said, I can hear you, but I can't see you. It was like I had gauze over my eyes, but there was nothing over my eyes. I guess it was lack of oxygen. And they asked me more questions, and they said to him, we really need to get going. We're going to have to ask you to leave the room. Craig says he heard him say, this is really bad, as he went out the room. And then they're like apologizing for needles, and they're doing something in my groin that was burning, and I'm bracing, and it's like, oh, but it wasn't so bad. There's something brushing on my face. I don't know what it is. And I'm just riding this like, I don't know where I am or why any of this is happening. And long story short, I started to get lucid again, and I started to be very present. And they explained to me that I had a heart attack, that I went into ventricular fibrillation, which is the widowmaker. So they call it, because once you go into VFib, there's no coming out of it. And basically, I've heard people say 5% of the people who have this happen survive. And it was a miracle. I was in the ambulance. Something brought me to the ambulance at exactly the minute I needed to be there. And what happens is, it's not like in the movies when they shock somebody and, you watch the body jump and then they come back. I thought that's what happened. I talked to the paramedics like a week later, get filling, and they said, oh, no, 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 no. When we shock you, you flatline. So from the time my heart stopped or was just in VFib, it quivers like jello. Nothing's pumping anymore. You're not breathing. So from that moment, you are clinically dead. Then when they shock you, you're flatlined 100%. So instead of just quivering, it's flat. And then they said, we just did CPR. They pounded the shit out of me, if I can say that, until suddenly they said, we got a pulse back.
And when you first came back, were you thinking of your near-death experience, or did that sort of come back to you later?
It was a combination. There were things that were very vivid, but very like out of sorts, like why is all of this happening? And it didn't quite make sense to me. I will say the emotion of it and how vivid it is as crystal clear to me now as it was then. It never changes, and it is emotional.
It's interesting, though, when you were on the other side, you didn't really recall your experience that you had just been through here on Earth.
No, it was like a completely separate. It was like whatever my life was didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was being present about why I need to come back. So it wasn't someone, as other people say, I was told you need to come back. I mean, maybe they did tell me that. I don't remember such specificity, but I do know I was shown why. And it was almost like my decision to have to do that. And I've said afterwards, I've always had a connection to spirituality and a curiosity through my life. And I know you and I in the earlier conversation talked a little bit about that. This was almost like a really crazy, surreal gift where they let me look through the door and they said, you can take a peek, Bob, but you can't stay. And it emphasized why I need to be here. And I will say, as others have said, there is no longer any fear of death whatsoever. But at the same time, it's like I can't go until I'm done doing what it is I'm supposed to do. And I'm still discovering that. And I'm constantly shown things reminding me, Bob, you need to share your story. Bob, you need to grow. You need to help other people. And that can be in a larger scale, such as with you and the show. Sometimes it's just a personal one-on-one conversation. And I know other people have said that. Yeah.
Well, it is really interesting that you still have to sort of discover what your purpose is, like we all have to do, I guess.
That's not special to us because we've had a near-death experience. That's the funny thing. I joke with friends and I'm irreverent about it because I say, like, we got hit in the head with a sledgehammer, but we're all the same. Every single one of us, we're all human beings here. We're all part of the same thing. It's just when, what, where, and how. And also, I say about people who worry all the time, and I love saying this, and some people are shocked. I say people worry about everything. I'm like, you know what? You can't change certain things. If it's good, it's going to happen. If it's bad, it's going to happen. So live your life, embrace it. I said, what's the worst that could possibly happen to you? Been there, done that. You
Yes, you
know.
have.
But people laugh and they're like, oh, that's horrible, Bob. You're talking about death. How could you joke about death? And I'm like, it's too serious to take seriously.
You talked about an area that was, I guess you would call it the void, but it was purple. And I've never heard anybody describe it as purple before.
A dark purple darkness. It was black, but it was almost like a purplish tone. And it was like an embracing. I've heard some other survivors describe it that way, and I go, yes, yes. And also I've explained or described these entities to other NDEers that I've met or that I've talked with. And some people are like, oh my gosh, that sounds like exactly what I've seen. Kenneth Gross, that's the name of the artist, and he's a fractal artist. And what I found was fascinating is that fractals are a part of our universal pattern in life. And I had to look this up. It's like repeating patterns in life, like the wake behind a ship, the pattern of the water, the pattern of leaves, the way that snowflakes are, the rain drops on a window, the repeating patterns. And he does these graphic artworks that are based on mathematical theory, outer space almost. And that there is this similarity of these graphics. And then yet what this one person described, she referred to as something else, but it looked very much like what I saw. And so we call them different things. I have one friend and who might have had a more religious background who described that entity as God or as Jesus. For me, it was my grandmother. For someone else, it may be something else. And there are other people who see more concrete images. But for me, it was like a pure light spirit form that I only knew who it was once we connected, if that makes any sense.
Well, and regardless of who it was, it made you feel really wonderful. How did the love you felt from your grandmother compare to the love she gave you here on earth?
It was almost more intense. It was almost more like a pure, pure love where, with our parents who of course, we all love. And then there's always, we all grow up with difficulties and there are challenges. And our parents did with their parents, where there might be judgment or there might be punishment or there might be threats or there might be conditions. This was pure. It was almost as if, and I have not done heavy duty drugs, I absolutely promise, but I imagine it would be like if you could take a pure love drug that would fill you where there is no challenge, no conflict of any kind. It is just pure. And I would say when I hear people describe God and what God is and God creating, everyone uses the terms in different ways. And again, as I've said, there are different interpretations, but there's commonality. I see God, not to sound like a 60s hippie, but God as love. I see that emotion that we feel, I believe is what we connect with, which is that oneness that we are part of, that we come from. And when you look, I've heard other people talk about, while on the other side, the flowers, the gardens, the beauty, I see that here. I look at a tree and I see incredible life and auras and beauty. I look at flowers. I look at blades of grass. I cannot kill an insect. I can even stink bugs. I can't get the stink bugs and squish them or flush them down the toilet. I have to capture them and let them go outside. All of my plants, I talk to them and I don't hear them talking back to me, but I feel like there's this interconnectivity and I am part of them. They are part of me. That has been emphasized. And that is the love that you asked about from my grandmother that is in everything. And some people look at me like, okay, Bob, enough is enough. I can't help it. This is what I see when I look at things. And when I can't, because of life or work or conflict or what have you, I struggle to get back to that some way. It's so important.
So you talk about the love, but did you feel any judgment, for example, in your life review?
No, it was showing me like why certain things happen. And again, I only had those two episodes. If there was more, Heather, I don't remember that. And maybe one day I will, and I can't tell you whether that would be my brain fabricating it or if it's a real memory. So I'm not going to suppose, but no, I was shown a circumstance that was vitally important and why I had to take action. And the other episode with my brother, which was so vivid, was more, like I say, to ease me into it or to show me to the reality of where I was. And again, I was not aware I was dead. I was not aware that there was a limit, that I was sick. None of that. None of it mattered anymore.
And it just shows too the commonality versus the differences that we talked about earlier, because a lot of people have life reviews, so there's a similarity, but also a lot of them see everything, and you just saw a couple of things.
I was gone a minute and a half. I don't know. Dr. Mary Neal, who has, written up To Heaven and Back, a best-selling book, and I've worked with Mary Neal on some things. She was gone 13 minutes. That's incredible to me. But a minute and a half is still a long time, and there was a lot that happened. So I don't know whether real life timing had anything to do with it, or that's all that I needed to know to come back and do what I need to do. And I haven't gone all the way, so I don't know. I just know getting there at that point it's a process that will enrich us when that time comes. And I don't believe either that's the first time any of us have been through it. It was something so familiar about all of it at the same time.
It felt like home.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would use that word. I've said when my job is done, I get to go home. Home as in safe, an origin, where we're from, where we're connected to. I believe that's very real. At least it was for me.
Bob, you talked about interconnectedness, and I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about your wonderful movie, but let's take that into part 2. Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. That was part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2. And if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more episodes.